Premise of the show is I like talking with great inspirational leaders about their careers, about the lessons they've learned along the way. But in particular, I really love leaning in to those moments of failure that, in many cases, really help define great leaders. If nothing else, they tend to be pretty damn funny. So I love hearing those things because I think there's so many shows and forums and articles and things that journalists lean in on to let people share these great moments of triumph, but I really believe moments of failure are really not celebrated enough. Thus, the name of our show, Oh Shit. We've also made some updates to our website, so we're trying to make it a lot easier for people to follow us, whether you want to watch us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or whether any of the platforms that are out there that we're currently broadcasting on. You go to oshipshow.com, all of them are cleanly laid out, and in fact, there's a live stream playing there right now. So just trying to make it really easy for people to subscribe. This week's guest is actually one of my favorite people in the entire world. Him is Juan-Carlos Morales. We've been friends, God, for at least 20 years at this point. We've been business partners. We've traveled the world together. We have a lot of great adventures. And you're going to get to meet him in a second on this week's episode of Oh Shit.
Oh shit.
And we're back. Juan, welcome to Oh Shit Show.
Thank you, buddy.
So I have to embarrass both myself and Juan as a great introductionist. So those of you who've been watching the show, those of you who know I have a very weird accent. It's not really English. It's not really American. Some people call it Mid-Atlantic. It's from this weird way I grew up and this strange, one English father and a mother from Oklahoma, strange background I have. So I don't think I've ever really got the right way of saying Juan or Juan the right way. And so one of my favorite stories about Juan when we were working together is we had an agency called iChameleon. People, I would talk about him all the time because I was always singing his praises in the London office. And he finally shows up in the London office. This is before video conferencing when we were all talking to each other that way. And they finally met him and they go, "Oh, we thought your name was Wong," and everyone thought that he was Chinese, but my bad pronunciation of his name had kind of ruined it. So if you hear us say right, it is in fact Juan Carlos Morales. So glad you're here, buddy.
You said it really good though, man. But that was actually one of the funniest introductions ever. Is that they were like, "You're not what we thought you were going to be like."
Yeah, 20 years, you'd think I'd have it down by now, but I guess
That's because you call me Nemo most of the time.
that's true. That's true. Yeah. So if you hear me refer to him as Nemo in this meeting, Nemo is his nickname. You're going to hear how he got that nickname in a moment. Um, sometimes when I bring people on the show, uh, they're known for different things, and they have maybe they've had a breakout company, or they've kind of gone up through the traditional corporate world. And I don't always encourage people to really get into the way that they came up through the industry. But I think your story is so interesting. I'm going to kick it off by saying how we met, but then I'd love for you to explain how it kind of changed from there. So he and I met, I'd say in the late '90s, in '97 probably, and it was at the very beginning of my very uncleverly named company, Laker.net, and it was an internet service provider and development shop. And I remember we were just hiring our first kind of web designers. And you gotta remember, this is the late '90s. Like, no, people didn't have huge portfolios. And he showed up and he had a bunch of magazines. I think, by the way, when I was interviewing him, I was taking turns of playing video games and interviewing him at the same time, which
It
probably
was Tribes, by the way. I remembered it.
Tribes. That's right. I was playing Tribes, and he brought in this big stack of magazines. And back then, that was typically meant they were going to show you their print portfolio because people had really big print portfolios. They were just starting to dabble in basically digital web design. And his magazines was actually graffiti work that he had done. And I remember thinking to myself, looking at this guy, I came from very different parts of the world, very opposite sides of the track, I think, at the time. And he showed me this work, and I remember looking at him so impressed. Like, if I can get this on this being my computer. I was like, this guy's going to be really incredible. And hats off to you. You pretty much learned everything I knew about web design and building sites in less than a year or two, and surpassed me a very, very long time ago. But you took that one start between us, really at the beginning of both of our careers, and
Absolutely.
really, really amazing stuff with it. Could you tell the audience a little bit about your very unconventional journey to being a very senior professional?
Yeah. I'll start at the very, very beginning just because I owe a debt of gratitude to my folks for it, which is that, like you said, when I was a kid, I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood, and in the neighborhood that I was in, it was very riddled with gangs, and I was always worried about getting beat up in school. And graffiti was one of the things that I was able to associate with that helped me not get beat up because I was kind of cool to those hardcore kids. And I fell in love with it. I mean, there was a book called Subway Art, which is very popular now. That it kind of started lots of people's graffiti career, and I was very passionate about it. And back then, when my dad would ask me what I wanted to do with my life, I said, "This is what I want to do. I want to do graffiti, and I want to paint murals." And until my dad had enough of it and said, you either go to college or you're out of here. And my mom, got me to sign up for college, and I signed up for graphic design, which sounded a lot like graffiti. It was like letters, colors, and pictures, and I was like, oh, that's kind of the same thing. I'll just do that to appease my dad. And lucky enough, when I started doing it, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with design. What I loved about graffiti was just about being creative. Um, and I got some formal education around it. But then even at that time, once I got out, I got my first job, like you said, at a print place. So those were all those magazines, right? I designed all the stuff that people threw away from their mailboxes. And for a little while, it was a good job until I had seen, I think it was Kia's first website, which was done in Flash, that just blew me the hell away. And it allowed for multimedia kind of use, sound, video, graphics. So that when you guys had called me for the interview, I was like, dude, I'm all in, right? So that's why I took it so seriously, because I was so inspired by it. But then from there,
why Nemo?
so Nemo was actually a video game. I played Nintendo 8-bit hardcore like everybody else, and there was a video game called Little Nemo the Dream Master, which was super cool. It was a little kid that like flew around this crazy land with like mushrooms and all kinds of like weird psychedelic stuff. But the letters were really cool. When you are a graffiti writer, you want letters that you could write very easily. So I could very easily write it like in cursive, and I could write it very fast. So that's why I adopted Nemo. And this was well before Pixar found it to be a great name for a little fish with a bum fin. Uh, so I've found Nemo more times than you could probably
Is there anything you've learned from graffiti that you can apply, that you feel like you've applied back to beyond design, aesthetic, things like that you've been able to apply back to your professional life?
Yes, fake it till you make it.
That's pretty funny.
I remember one time we got me and one of my good friends, we had gotten pulled over at an abandoned building. Not pulled over, we got cops came. We were in an abandoned building, and they like walked us out. They escorted us at gunpoint, which was, talk about overkill. We were two little nerds. We probably were not threatening at all. And when we get out, at that time we didn't have IDs. We were really young. The cop asked me like, "What's your name, your address?" And he wanted to like run my information. And I had given the guy all lies. I was just like, my name is Eduardo Sanchez, and I live in blah 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 blah. And then the guy that I was with told them the truth. But then after we walked away and he let us go, my friend was like, "You totally lied to him," and I was like, "Yeah." I'm like, I wasn't trying to go to jail. And you just you learn that sometimes you gotta improvise.
That's for sure. Um, so, LakerNet was again a great early stage business, and for you and I think I sort of look at it as kind of my formative years and
How
really
many websites do you think we did back then in that like several year period?
couple hundred.
At least,
Yeah,
like we were knocking
I
them out in like 2 days.
I was thinking, I was probably saying somewhere between 400 and 500, probably just in the LakerNet days, and then we went, but again, it was if that was the immersion and the foundation of a lot of the stuff that you and I learned. From there, I went on and joined Web United, and you went and had a crack at I think your first entrepreneurial venture, which probably some very good ownership moments there. But you also happened to go become one of the kind of original slash founding team, however you want to perceive it, of Crispin Porter and Bogusky's
Yep.
interactive team. A lot of people, for those of you who don't follow the advertising world, Crispin Porter and Bogusky was, I think, maybe one of the most awarded agencies of all time. Certainly,
Probably close. Yeah.
yeah, and certainly the years that Nemo was part of that team, and obviously there's a lot of incredible people there, but part of that team, it was probably them at their peak. So the Crispin Porter crew was doing everything from sites like Subservient Chicken that some people might remember, or one of my favorite sites of all time called Method Hand Soap, which would give you the
Come clean. Yeah.
yeah, come clean, would absolve you of your sins. But it was just an incredible time and interactive, far more interesting, frankly, than where we're at today.
Yeah.
When you look back at your years at Crispin, were there any? I feel like you guys were pushing the boundaries pretty damn hard there all the time. Maybe too hard sometimes. Is there any kind of oh shit moments where you're like, man, I can't believe we pulled that off?
Man, there was a lot of things that I can't believe we pulled off. I think the thing with Crispin was, I felt so, everyone there was so talented. I mean, they had done such great work. I remember when I went to the interview, I actually didn't know anything about them because, back in those days, we weren't really into advertising.
Hmm.
So I was a consumer like anybody else. I remember looking at their portfolio and seeing that they had done all the truth work and the mini work and all the stuff that I was like, wow, this is advertising that I actually like. So once I walked in there, I was a little bit fanboyed a little bit. I was just like, man, I don't deserve to be here. These people are super talented.
Hmm.
But the thing that they needed was someone that could help them with digital, right? So there was always people coming into my office like, hey, what if we did this? And at that time, it was just the wild, wild west. I mean, we could do just about anything. I mean, you remember back then when
I don't feel like we ever said no to anything. It was more like, let me see if I can figure that out. Would be the stock
yeah.
answer.
I mean, even the mini robot thing that we did, which I remember the first time that the person that came up with the idea, I think his name was Dave Schwartz from CPB, came into my office and he said, "Hey, we have this idea of doing this thing called interactive fiction, right? Which was like that we were going to just create this story that people could interact with, but it was all going to be fake." I was just like blown away. I remember calling you, being like, "Freddie, I can't tell anyone about this, but I have to tell someone."
I remember that phone call.
I was like,
I remember I was driving when you called me, and I remember thinking it was the coolest thing I'd ever heard.
But even once we did it, and we needed to get people to go to it.
And by the way, quickly give the 20-second pitch on what the mini robots. It was a viral.
So basically, the idea was that some guy named Colin Mayhew, who had worked at the mini plant, had been fired for his unconventional ideas, created a robot out of Mini Cooper parts to go out at night and stop people from getting into accidents. Which again, it's really funny and far out there, but the elaborateness of how we created it. I mean, every character in the story had their own website, like on GeoCities, with like actual shitty counters, and it was the first time I actually designed a shitty site on purpose.
Yeah. I think if I remember correctly, there was like 14 or 15 different digital presences you guys made. So if people went down the rabbit hole and said, well, what's this? Like they kept finding stuff that just really kept going, is this real? Which I think is fascinating.
And the real crazy thing about it was when we weren't getting any traffic because we weren't pushing it, right? And this was at the very early days of kind of virality, if you want to call it that. So Jeff Benjamin, the CD, he had this great idea of like, hey, let's go into the Mini Cooper forums, because at that time there was a huge community of Mini Cooper owners, and let's seed it. Right, that was the first time we had ever come up with that idea of seeding. And I remember I wrote the line, which was just, "Has anyone else seen this?" And then the link, and that was it, man. It just flew away. I mean, we had people all over the place contacting Colin Mayhew because they wanted to see the robot.
Yeah, amazing.
So it was cool. It actually taught me that, we wield a lot of power with what it is that we do, and in the wrong hands, it can obviously be used maliciously. But we had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, so while Nemo was off doing that, I was off, in another business called Web United that Chameleon Collective had been acquired by, and we decided that we wanted to go and do something together again. And so we started the first company that had a chameleon in it, not like the new one, Chameleon Collective, was called iChameleon Group to be more specific. And we pretty much made a business out of these really kind of crazy sites. And
Yeah.
so we hit the idea of like getting paid to do viral hoaxes on a side note as an actual job, and well paid, I might add, for what were basically what we thought was the funniest thing ever. We were coming up with half the ideas while we're sitting in a bar, and clients and consumers seem to love them. One of my favorites that makes me think of a bit of an oh shit moment. We were working with, I think it was Saatchi LA for Toyota for a product called Your Other You. And they had come to us with this idea of like, they're like, we've got these TV ads and there's these characters that, we want to make this like, you can have this like, follow along story with them. And we're the ones that, if I remember correctly, flipped it on them and came back to them and said, "Hey, how about, and we know that's your idea, but what if we turned it into basically a hoax, basically a prank you play? So it's not something you're controlling; it's something you put someone else through, basically.
They actually came up with the prank.
My bad.
And I'll never forget this call because we succeeded in this, which was, they were like, hey, like we really want to like ruffle some feathers with this, right? Because they thought that was going to help get the publicity, but I think it was when we started coming up with the ideas, that's when it got, remember we really had like videos that were being rendered with like your name in it and all this stuff that looked very real. So I mean, we
were doing stuff that there was literally no technology to support. I don't think we've ever kind of bit off something that ambitious before. But the oh shit moment that really sticks in my head, maybe the prank was a little too successful, was, if I remember correctly, an older woman sued Toyota because she thought that someone was coming to get her at her house because of this prank, and that she was traumatized. I think it said she was sleeping with a knife or a gun under her pillow because the site had accidentally freaked her out.
It was a scary looking dude, man. I think for us, we were digital natives at that time, and we took for granted how other people didn't realize how that could be faked, right? Things like your Google Maps address and
to us, it was pure
entertainment. Yeah, mind you, this was before all the opt-ins now. Like right now, we can never do that. I could never give an app all of your information and then use it, right?
Yeah.
But back then we got away with it. But it was the wild, wild west, man. We were just going down all the avenues that we could to create the coolest thing possible. And and I got nominated for a Titanium at Cannes that year. So
no regrets on that one. And so from there, again, Nemo and I had a long journey together. We went over to Sapient together. So I should mention Nemo was the ECD at iChameleon. He went on to become one of the key CDs at Sapient Razorfish, or Sapient Nitro at the time, and then it became Sapient Razorfish, and then I think Sapient Publicist. What name do they have this week? But it was Sapient Nitro when he and I were there. And I think what's interesting, about this is, again, you and I didn't. I think you actually have some form of degree. I dropped out before degree. I never even came close to finishing. And so, my point is, it's kind of unconventional guys now in a publicly traded company that really started off as a big consulting firm where everyone was very well pedigreed and had very fancy degrees and all that. And I felt very much like these kind of slightly odd guys out in that regard.
I think what saved us was we were such digital nerds. I mean, we still are, but at that time, it wasn't, the information wasn't so widely available as it is today, right? So we, even at Sapient, which they were also incredibly
They
digital.
were technology guys, so not marketing, creative marketing people.
Right. So I think that was one of the things that really helped us is that, we might have not had the traditional ways of education, but we kind of went in there and just
Mhm.
like your dad said, right? We fucked it up all the ways that we could until we figured it out.
Yeah.
So I think that was what we had to our benefit was just raw like energy for the topic.
Yeah. If you could look when you look back at Sapient, and I have very fond memories of my time there. I'm very thankful that Canoe Infective became part of Sapient. I'm thankful that our family, and when I say our family, all that our team members stayed there for so long, and I think it was
Yeah, I mean, we still hang out with a lot of those people
yeah,
today.
exactly. So I think that was a great experience. Um, on a side note, by the way, I remember when we did the deal with Sapient that people didn't take them very seriously as a creative force. They turned out to be absolute leading edge digital
Yeah.
agency. I remember one particular guy saying to me, "It's one I really respect. I won't name, but it was just a very top tier creative guy." And when I said, "Hey, we're joining Sapient," and he goes, "Aren't those the guys that fix our printers?" And I'm like, "Oh God, no, they're not an IT tech shop." But 3 years later, we were out, winning every award known to man. It was pretty wild.
Yeah, I think we were ahead of the curve on that, right? Like the whole idea of consulting and mixing consulting and creativity. I mean, I think we were probably lucky enough to be one of the first people in that arena. I mean, now it's kind of commonplace. I'm sure we'll get to it, but with my time at PwC and now all those kind of industries are starting to blur together. I mean, I think that was really the kind of early beginnings of that.
What would you say? And not to put you on the spot, but if you think about PwC, sorry, Sapient as being maybe the first truly corporate, serious organization that you or I had ever been
Yeah,
in. I mean, obviously CPB was very legit, but it was very loose.
yeah,
Um, is there any, in speaking to kind of anyone who may be in the audience right now, and people that how do I say this, that maybe have these non-traditional backgrounds like us, you hit corporate life for the first time. Is there either any oh shit moments you can specifically name, or certainly the minimum maybe lessons you learned from seeing that?
yeah. I mean, I think there's tons of oh shit moments because of that lack of experience, we messed a lot of things up, right? But I do think that when I first started in Sapient, there was obviously a little bit of imposter syndrome because we didn't come from that background. So you're
Mhm.
just like, am I as good as these other folks?
Mhm.
Can I do
I'll
what they
admit I
do?
had a little chip on my shoulder when I was there. I was worked extra hard, I think, to prove that I, you know, was as, could keep up with anyone there. Harvard degree aside, missing or
Yeah,
not.
yeah. But I think that the thing that we did have, or I had, and I realized was something that not a lot of other folks had, was just a lot of that like hardcore passion. And I was really into the work. I was really into making great work. I was really if it didn't get me excited, then I wouldn't stop pushing the work, right? And I think that little by little, I kind of learned that I had different skills that other people didn't have, right? Maybe because I had to work a little bit harder at it, and I had to claw at it a little bit harder than other folks might have. That you just realize that hey, it doesn't really matter how we all kind of came to the table, right? What backgrounds we all took, we all have something to add, we all have something to contribute. And that came even more evident at PwC, right? Like at PwC, I felt like I was not the smartest guy in the room. I mean, everybody there had master's degrees from very reputable universities. These guys and gals were all very smart. But it took me a while to realize that I was smart at different things that they weren't smart at, right? And together we'd be super smart, right? Instead of us kind of battling over who was smarter and whether creativity had a place or whether business had a place. Once I stopped worrying about that and kind of getting over my imposter syndrome, which I think everybody has and is perfectly normal, we all bring something unique to the table, right? It's digital's a team sport. I mean, I think design and creative and all that stuff is a team sport as well. And you need to surround yourself with good team members.
Mm. On that note, and I have no embarrassment in giving you this big compliment in front of a live audience, but for those of you that don't know Nemo or haven't had a chance to look him up on LinkedIn or see his background, but maybe know a little about my background, I can tell you that he's actually the best professional partnership. Period. There's no additional words I need after that. He's just an absolute rock star to work with. Clients love him. The work he puts out is incredible. And so I think, and I think he catches people off guard sometimes because it's not maybe not what people are expecting. Um, I think the advice I would give people if they were entering corporate life, for the first time after maybe they were in a startup, they got bought, or they are going into a larger company for the first time, especially if they're younger. I think I was only 28 when we did the Sapient deal.
Yeah.
And I think things that I learned were it's very hard to protect your culture. The very insular family culture is not there, but there's different types of culture there, and just because it changes doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different. Um, uh, but I'd say the other thing I'd watch out for is especially if you're a leader and you're you know ascending through the organization. And I hate trying to make anyone paranoid, but be really careful about you separating your kind of personal life and your professional life, because I find that in the corporate world things can be very competitive. I'm going to not use the word politics, but I'm just say that it can be very competitive, and I think some people can sometimes want to find reasons to chip away at your credibility for whatever reason. And my advice would be never give them a chance
Yeah.
to. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think you can't let those people get you down,
no,
and get in your way. But I also do think that a lot of that depends on the company, man. I think that
yeah,
companies have different cultures, and those cultures work for them, right? And in some
mhm,
cases, that kind of clawing at the top of the ladder works for some companies, and it also works for some people, right? Some people want to know that, okay, show me what the steps I got to take to get to the top are, and I'm going to go ahead and do it, right?
yeah,
I think for people like us, we're a little bit more human around how we
mhm,
go about things. And trust me, I've made that error that you're talking about over and over again, where I become friends with all the people that I work with and all the people that I've managed. And you try to do good things for them, but they're not always telling you the whole truth. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So you do have to kind of operate with a bit of skepticism sometimes.
yeah. Today is not the day to get into it, but I just think it's a worthy footnote. The new company that both you and I work in, Chameleon Collective, um, we have a very untraditional business structure where we're actually a flat organization, top to bottom. There are theoretically no bosses and no employees, so to speak, as we like to say. And we actually reorg our leadership structure depending on who owns the client relationship. And this non-hierarchical structure, we've now scaled up to an organization, close to 100 folks, and it works. And it's kind of been interesting to see the impact that it's had, because people, there's no way to claw up or down if you just take that out of the equation, and it's had a pretty profound impact on our culture, that I'm rather proud of, frankly.
Yeah,
Um,
it's revolutionary. I mean, I talk to people in other companies, and they're like, a few months ago, someone was dealing with reviews, right? The yearly review cycle where you gotta review all your staff, and I was like, I do not miss that at all. I'm like, I love that that doesn't happen at Chameleon. Like everybody reviews themselves, and everybody, is a big an adult about their professional life.
So I'd love to segue over to PwC. And one of the things I think is so interesting about PwC is, you actually had left Sapient, and I hope you're okay with me talking about this stuff, to BGT because you wanted to step away from maybe management and get back to just doing the work.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Sapien, I was managing like almost 100 people. My
yeah,
my job was just kind of damage control every day. So I mean, as a designer, it was not
yeah,
really
yeah.
what I wanted to do. Right.
Yeah. And so you joined this great shop called BGT that ends up getting bought by PwC. I think if I remember correctly, you kind of kept your head down and hoped that no one had kind of figured out what your real capabilities were there. But it looks like someone figures it out eventually, and kind of take the story from there. I think of what happened to you in the BGT BWC world.
So yeah, it was really interesting because like you said, I had joined BGT because I wanted to I wanted to join a smaller company, a more family kind of culture. The team was about 15 people. We went from 100 to 15. I was like, this is a walk in the park. I can do this very easily, and still be able to enjoy my job. And also, the twins were born around that time, my twin daughters. So I kind of also wanted just more time to spend with the kids. And it wasn't more than 6 months that my boss at the time, who became my partner in the end, David, had said, "Hey, this is going to happen. This is what it looks like." And at first, I was like, I had never heard of PwC, so I was just like, "Wait a minute, what would this company want anything to do with us?"
Yeah.
And then I had talked to one of those senior partners at that time, and his explanation made so much sense, which was just, we have all this strategy, we have all these thoughts, we just have no one that can turn them into ideas. And I was like, man, that's a marriage made in heaven. But in that time, there was a lot of not everybody knew what was happening. It wasn't public knowledge, but there was a lot of making materials for us to send to PwC's clients around what we were going to do. And I had made this deck around innovation at that time, like a 3-month kind of innovation thing where we would come up with ideas and prototype things very quickly and all that. And I think that made its way up the PwC leadership. And before you knew it, they realized that they had something great in the company that they had purchased, and that it would be a lot bigger than maybe what they had thought it was going to be. And the Experience Center was born, and it wasn't maybe more than a year before they were like, "Hey, we think you should be a partner." And I was like, "What's a partner?" And luckily, I had some of the best mentorship I've received in my career. I mean, along with you and Gaston, from Sapient, the guys that I worked with at PwC were phenomenal. But I was totally unconventional, right? Like I said, I didn't have the degree that those guys had. I didn't come from that background. But once we got together, I mean, it was magic.
I had, again, not to embarrass you on this, but I think this is funny as hell, frankly. PwC has what, at any given time, 145,000 employees, something like that.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's massive.
Yeah, huge.
It's massive.
And the company's been around for over 100 years.
150 something years. Yeah.
So it's probably employed millions of people in its lifetime.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Easy.
And so basically, when they went to make you a partner, as I remember it, you basically failed all known criteria for all the standard, because a lot of those people are finance guys, right?
Yeah.
You failed all the known criteria. And one of the stories I think is always kind of amazing is that they basically had to rewrite the rule book to make you an acceptable partner. To the company. So you actually became the first creative partner in the history of PwC, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, it had a lot to do with just my ability to sell, right? All of those guys are hardcore sales folks. It also had to do with my education. They had even asked me at one point if I would go back to college to get my master's, and I was like, no. And also my story was very non-traditional. My accolades were accolades that none of them had.
Yeah. What percentage of the partners there were also great graffiti artists? Just out of interest, quite a few, I'm guessing. At least 30%.
And it's funny. That's what when they did the press release about it, that was what the journalists really wanted to write about. So like now, every time I meet somebody that saw that article, they're like, "You're the graffiti guy."
So
for all graffiti writers in the world somewhere, one of us made it.
That's awesome. So when you if you think back about, we've talked a little about culture, talked about leadership, and I think there's kind of, if I had to reflect maybe on what today's episode felt a lot about to me, I think it's about maybe people that come from one world and entering another world and being able to adapt and be successful in it. If you reflected back on your time at PwC, and whether it's an oh shit moment or just something that you wish you'd done differently, is there anything that you would have picked or stands out to you that you're comfortable?
I don't know if I would have done it differently, but I think now I've been gone now for almost 2 years, so I've had lots of time to reflect. I mean, the leadership there and I are still good friends. I talk to the current chief creative officer there, I would say at least on a weekly basis, Jose Reyes. And one of the things that I realized is if you're the one that's different, right? Like for me, I was the creative person in the designer in the partnership that came from my background that wasn't like the other guys. Not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent. When you're that one person, it feels very lonely and you feel very isolated and you feel like, man, am I even in the right spot? And I remember using the analogy that I felt like I was swimming upstream a lot, not because of anything that the firm was doing, but just because I was communicating differently. I mean, I remember I had one interview with someone where I was like, oh, I've been in the business of creative for all this time. And the guy's like, well, I'm creative. And I was like, like an industry term. And he's like, what industry? And it's like shit like that you're just like, you got to deal with a little bit of that, right? When you are the one that's not like the other and you're the first one, you're going to swim upstream for a little while, right? And that is part of it. I wish I would have known that ahead of time. I wish I would have known, like someone would have said, hey, this is going to be really fucking hard. And no one's going to understand you for a little while. Or not no one. Most of the people aren't going to understand you. Not saying that it's bad, but it's like, these guys came from completely different places than Sapien. Right? Came from completely different places than CPB, right? At CPB, they would delay a project because Alex said it wasn't good enough, right? Like at WC, they like laughed at that. They're like, "What do you mean?" And it's not that that's wrong. That's just that's a different culture, right? There's a different, PwC is trying to run a really powerful business. CPB was trying to make really great work, right? So they were both effective in their approaches. But if you are the one that's not like the others, right, you are going to have to swim upstream. So, eat your Wheaties, do jumping jacks every morning, be mentally prepared for that swim. Because it's going to be hard, but I think thinking back on it now, I wish I would have known that because maybe I would have had more steam, right? Maybe I would have had a different perspective on it. To me, it happened very organically, and I just wasn't ready for it.
That's great. I appreciate you being so human and kind of acknowledging that. I think that a lot of people watching, whether they're watching live or watching later, as a lot of people tend to do, I think some people are going to find real value out of that, and it's those are the types of things we really love on our ship, is when people can kind of be really open about those moments. So
especially now, I mean, we're talking so much about diversity, and we're talking about the lack of people in places, right? Whether that be cultural diversity, racial diversity, all that stuff. As the business world starts to diversify, there are going to be a lot of people that aren't like other people in businesses, and they got to be prepared for the marathon, right? It's not a sprint. It takes time to change these things, right? You look at PwC now; they have lots of creative folks in leadership now after I've left, right? So it's not just one person now. Now there's a squad of those.
That's cool. Very good.
Which is good. I mean, that's what's going to ensure their success.
So you know what? I think that's actually a great place to call it for today. I would like, it's a great, meaningful thought that some people can kind of chew over and think over. I want to thank you again for joining me today. I want to thank you for being so open and sharing some of the stories. I hope it's really helpful to some of the leaders that are watching right now. And I will see you soon, I'm sure.
Awesome, buddy.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.